imagine that you're really frustrated now. You're sitting there and you're listening. And the Speaker of the House says he wants an impeachment inquiry. This is something you and I have been calling for now for several months, actually. And we've said, when will the House Republicans do something? Do something about this corrupt president. So you're hearing from the left-wing media that there's no evidence that Joe Biden took any money, regurgitating what the Democrat Party says. And I've written about the state-run party, the Democrat Party, and the state-run media. And I want to thank some of my friends in this business and on TV for regurgitating it. Don't worry, you don't have to put a footnote and tell anybody where you read it from. It's okay. I got it from Raymond Aron, a brilliant philosopher and journalist from France, who I've cited in at least 3 of my books. And you can find that in my endnotes. I don't expect the same from people who don't do their homework. But that's a separate issue. So when you hear people like Matt Gaetz, I'm putting the budget aside. We're going to have Chris Roy on here. We're going to have a good talk about the budget. Chip Roy. But when you hear Matt Gaetz going on about that this is a diversion by the Speaker, I've had about enough of that. I am so pissed off you have no idea. That these Republicans, even so-called conservatives, can't coalesce around an impeachment inquiry? That is overdue? Are you kidding me? I don't know what their agenda is. It's not a conservative agenda. That's number one. Number two, I am sick and tired of hearing people like Ken Buck and others say, there's no evidence of an impeachable offense. There's no evidence that Joe Biden took any money. The Democrat Party is saying this. The media is saying this. That's not the test for impeachment. And I want to encourage James Comer. I want to encourage my dear friend Jim Jordan. I want to encourage, what the other guy's name? Smith of House Ways and Means Committee. You need to broaden what you're looking into here. Yes. Continue to look into what you are, financial crimes, profiteering, and so forth. But impeachment is broader than that, America. And here's where I want to provide you with information. Here's where I want to educate these members of Congress. The media are liars and they know it, but we'll educate them along the way, too. And Mr. Buck. And Mr. Buck. There have been great books written about impeachment. First one would be the Federalist Papers. Madison's Notes, that's pretty good. But impeachment goes back. Impeachment goes back to the British. It goes back to the Parliament versus the King. It goes back to a significant period of time. And this was argued, it was debated at the Constitutional Convention. Now, they never came up with a specific definition of high crimes and misdemeanors. But they certainly didn't mean solely and only crimes committed under the criminal code. There was no criminal code. They just formed the government. And so we're having an entire national debate on idiocy. And it's intentional. The state-run party, the Democrat Party, with the state-run media, pushing a narrative with the help of quislings in the Republican Party. First, some current history, American history. Donald Trump was wrongly impeached, and he was impeached twice, one on Ukraine, one on January 6th. Nobody said, where's the evidence? The evidence of what? But there certainly wasn't any money involved. There certainly wasn't any violation of the criminal code. They specifically impeached him on insurrection and sedition. One count. That was it. Rammed it through. The Senate couldn't muster the votes to convict him. So he was adjudicated innocent. But they still accuse him of it. But nonetheless, not my point. Bill Clinton, he was impeached. And the impeachment surrounded the issues of lying under oath and obstruction of justice. Andrew Johnson was impeached. Virtually every one of those 11 articles was based on the Tenure of Office Act. I don't have enough time tonight to get into this because that was an unconstitutional law. But that's beside the point. So you actually have Andrew Johnson impeached on trumped-up charges. Bill Clinton was impeached for lying under oath and obstructing justice. Donald Trump was impeached twice on trumped-up charges. So where's the evidence, they say? Where's the evidence that Joe Biden got one penny? I even heard this on Fox and Friends today. Where's the evidence that he got one penny? There doesn't have to be any evidence that he got one penny. If he opened the door to his son having access to foreign governments, to foreign corporations from which his son and son alone made $20, $30, $40 million. That is an impeachable offense. If he assisted his son in making those connections and his son did not register under FARA, then actually he's a co-conspirator in that. Well, how did he know? It doesn't matter. That is an impeachable offense. When he violates our immigration laws, when he just wipes clean 700,000 cases for adjudication, when he keeps the border open, so fentanyl's coming into the country, so that murder that they just caught in Pennsylvania comes into the country, so God knows who's coming into the country, creating mayhem and anarchy in our cities and in our states, and certainly on the border, that is an impeachable offense. We're not talking about mere policy disputes. We're talking about a real impact on the nation, on the people of this country. Now, how do I know this? Because unlike everybody else who's commented on this on TV and radio, I've studied it. Here, I'll give you a short lesson on this from the Congressional Research Service. Can't read it all. The debates at the Constitutional Convention over what behavior should be subject to impeachment focus mainly on the president. In discussing whether the president should be removable by impeachment, Gouverneur Morris argued that the president should be removable through the impeachable process, noting concern that the president might, quote, be bribed by a greater interest to betray his trust, and pointed to the example of Charles II receiving a bribe from Louis XIV. The adoption of high crimes and misdemeanors standard during the Constitutional Convention reveals that the framers did not envision impeachment as a proper remedy for simple policy disagreements with the president. During the debate, the framers rejected a proposal to include, in addition to treason and bribery, maladministration as an impeachable offense, which would have presumably incorporated a broad range of common law offenses. Although maladministration was a ground for impeachment in many state constitutions at the time of the Constitution's drafting, the framers instead adopted the term high crimes and misdemeanors from English practice. James Madison objected to including maladministration as grounds for impeachment because such a vague standard would be, quote, equivalent to a tenure during the pleasure of the Senate, unquote. I agree with that, but that's not what we're talking about. The convention voted to include high crimes and misdemeanors instead. Arguably, the framers' rejection of such a broad term supports the view that congressional disagreement with the president's policy goals is not sufficient grounds for impeachment. Fair enough. Of particular importance to the understanding of high crimes and misdemeanors to the framers was a roughly contemporaneous British impeachment proceeding of Warren Hastings. I'm not going to get into that in great detail. While evidence of precisely what conduct the framers and ratifiers of the Constitution considered to constitute high crimes and misdemeanors is relatively sparse, the evidence available indicates that they considered impeachment to be an essential tool to hold government officers accountable for political crimes or offenses against the state. James Madison considered it indispensable, I'm quoting him, indispensable, that some provision be made for defending the community against incapacity, negligence, or perfidy of the chief executive. Boy, that sure fits. As the president might, quote, pervert his administration into a scheme of peculation or oppression, or betray his trust to foreign powers. Betray his trust to foreign powers. Alexander Hamilton in explaining the Constitution's impeachment provisions, described impeachable offenses as arising from, quote, the misconduct of public men, or in other words, this is him, from the abuse or violation of some public trust. Such offenses were political, he said, as they relate chiefly to injuries done immediately to the society itself. Where's the evidence that Biden took money? Who cares? That's not the test. These political offenses could take innumerable forms and simply could not be neatly delineated at the time. At the North Carolina Ratifying Convention, James Iredell, later to serve as Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, noted the difficulty in defining what constitutes an impeachable offense beyond causing injury to the government. For him, impeachment was, quote, calculated to bring offenders to punishment for a crime which is not easy to describe, but which everyone must be convinced is a high crime and misdemeanor against the government. The occasion for its exercise will arise from acts of great injury to the community. Thought the president would be impeachable for receiving a bribe, of course, or, quote, acting from some corrupt motive or other, but not merely for want of judgment. For some corrupt motive. Similarly, Samuel Johnson, then the governor of North Carolina and later the state's first senator, thought impeachment was reserved for great misdemeanors against the public. These are offenses against the public that they were concerned about. At the Virginia Ratifying Convention, a number of individuals claimed that impeachable offenses were not limited to indictable crimes. For example, James Madison himself argued that were the president to assemble a minority of states in order to ratify a treaty at the expense of the other states, this would constitute an impeachable misdemeanor. Hey, Joe Biden is essentially entering into a treaty with Iran. He's not even trying to organize a minority of states. He's doing it on his own in violation of the treaty clause of the Constitution. Oh, Mark, come on. And Virginia Governor Edmund Randolph, who will become the nation's first attorney general, noted that impeachment was appropriate for a, quote, willful mistake of the heart, but not for incorrect opinions. In other words, if you're intentionally letting fentanyl into this country, you don't have to actually sign off on people bringing it into the country, but if you're aware that your policies are resulting in 100,000 Americans dying every year, fentanyl coming into the country, that's an impeachable offense. James Wilson, delegate to the Constitutional Convention from Pennsylvania, by the way, and later a Supreme Court justice, delivered talks at the College of Philadelphia on impeachment following the adoption of the federal Constitution. He claimed that impeachment was reserved to political crimes and misdemeanors and to political punishments. He argued that in the eyes of the framers, impeachments did not come within the sphere of ordinary jurisprudence, in other words, ordinary criminal law. They are founded on different principles, are governed by different maxims, and are directed to different objects. Thus, for Wilson, the impeachment and removal of an individual did not preclude a later trial and punishment for a crime. The great Associate Justice Joseph Story, who's looked to often because he's written so brilliantly about the Constitution, his writings on the Constitution echo the understanding that impeachment applied to political offenses. He noted that impeachment applied to those, quote, offenses committed by men, public men, in violation of their public trust and duties that are often political. And like Hamilton, Story considered the range of impeachable offenses, quote, so various in their character, so indefinable in their actual involutions, that it is almost impossible to provide systematically for them by positive law. Now, that's what high crimes and misdemeanors is all about. There's ambiguity, but not so much ambiguity that it is unclear that Joe Biden, in his violation of Supreme Court orders, in his violation of immigration practices resulting in the death of Americans, and I could go on, should have been impeached a long time ago. So to hear this guy Gates in the, oh, this is a distraction. Read your damn Constitution, Mr. Conservative.